this idea that nature is dying, this idea that we're on the cusp of an apocalypse. False, 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 and unethical for anybody to say that to young people. It's absolutely irresponsible. It should be denounced, as it has not still been, by most climate scientists who want to use that fear to gain social, political, and economic power in the society. I think it's really immoral. I just, that's why I wrote this book. I don't think it's right. My daughter's fine. She's 15. I talked to her about the science, but her friends, they told me things that were disturbing, and they know absolutely nothing. They think that maybe plastic straws cause climate change, just to give you one sense of it. It's just depressing, and it's irresponsible by these teachers. Greta Thunberg, according to her and her mother, had many reasons to be depressed other than just the apocalyptic propaganda. But the propaganda didn't help.
Hello and welcome to Recent UK with me, Darren Grimes. If you do enjoy today's show, which I'm sure you will, hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell. On today's show, I think it's safe to say that climate change and the repercussions of it are on the political agenda like never before, with talk of President-elect Joe Biden's Green New Deal as fires have recently engulfed the west coast of the United States, leading politicians there to make further demands that we act to combat climate change. And closer to home, Sir David Attenborough's BBC documentaries continue to attract very large audiences. And the environmental alarmism by groups have consequences. We've seen in our own country, 17% of children in Britain said worries about climate change were disturbing their sleep. 19% said these fears were giving them nightmares. A survey of 2,000 children aged between 8 to 16 by Comres for BBC Newsround found these shocking stats earlier this year. So today I'm aiming to bring in the experts to try and help bring about a shift in the way in which we approach this debate. And whilst we acknowledge that there's more to do, my guests today argue that nuclear energy is actually the answer to many of our climate-based problems. Anyway, that's enough from me. Let's get some guests on and work through the issues. So on the far right, yeah, not literally, but on my far right on the screen. Michael Shellenberger. Cancelled. Is a Time magazine hero of the environment, the winner of the 2008 Green Book Award from the Stevens Institute of Technology Centre for Science Writings, and an invited expert reviewer of the next assessment report for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That is quite the mouthful. He's also the author of this fantastic book that I have here, Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. Hello to you, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Darren. We're looking forward to this.
And now Chris Barnard is the policy director. Chris, if I get this wrong, just shout. But the policy director of the American Conservation Coalition and the founder of the British Conservation Alliance, which is dedicated to empowering the next generation to engage with the principles of pro-market environmentalism and conservation. Yes, I got that right.
You got it right.
Perfect. Fantastic. Now, Michael, before we dive into nuclear, I wonder if we first might address a few of the themes in your book, which obviously I have here. And for full disclosure, I wasn't sent this book. I did actually buy it myself, which is why I'm so excited to speak to you, because I found it a thoroughly refreshing and informative read. And it exposed to me just how ignorant we are on much of what we've achieved. And as far as the planet's concerned, we're actually doing quite a good job. I just want to list a few of them so viewers get a sense of what it is I'm actually talking about and how out of sync much of the discourse around this actually is. If we think about conventional air pollution, that peaked, 50 years ago in developed nations, and carbon emissions have peaked or will soon in most others. The amount of land that we use for meat production is declining. Forests in rich nations are growing back and wildlife returning. Deaths from extreme events should keep declining. Cruelty to animals in meat production has declined, and so on and so forth. Now, Michael, why do you think that outfits like Extinction Rebellion continue, with an almost religious-like zeal, continue to put the fear of God into all of us, no less our children?
Yeah, well, that's the big question that really motivated me to write the book. I was someone that changed my mind about nuclear power about 10 years ago. I decided we needed it for climate change. And I was confused as to why so many people that say they're most alarmist about climate change were also fighting me on trying to build new nuclear power plants really everywhere in the world, from Illinois to California to South Korea to Japan to France to Germany, Britain. Everywhere you go, the people who say they're most concerned about climate change are the ones saying we should not use nuclear power. And so that motivated me to take a deep dive and really fall down this rabbit hole around the history of the environmental movement, what it's about, what it's not about. And like you said, I mean, a lot of these environmental trends, most of them perhaps are going in the right direction. We're living longer, we're more secure than ever from natural disasters. We have more food than we've ever produced in human history, or at least in recorded or known human history. And there's no reason to think that deaths from natural disasters are going to increase in the future, even with pretty significant levels of climate change, or that we're going to run out of food or somehow be able to stop growing food. So why did we come to see a problem, a real problem? I think climate change is a real problem, and we should address it. I don't think it's the most serious environmental problem in the world or the worst environmental problem in the world, and I also think we're making good progress on it. But nonetheless, how did we come to see it as the Book of Revelations? You know, where all these trends that have been going in the right direction would somehow reverse themselves and go in the wrong direction. And what I really get to at the end is, you know, it's a result of what we all know it is, which is a pretty radical left political philosophy that comes out of the 1960s. I really dated back first to the post-war era in the United States and Britain in particular, but then also back to the late 1700s, where the famous British economist Thomas Malthus really hated the idea that human progress would continue and that humans would thrive, and really invented what was eventually called the dismal, the reason they called economics the dismal science, because he wrongly forecast human starvation and running out of food. So I trace it back to that, and really a desire to gain power over your personal and social life and over politics by preaching the end of the world, even though it's based on pretty phony science.
Mm-hmm. Christopher, here in Britain, how helpful do you think the likes of these documentaries by Sir David Attenborough really are ultimately? If we consider, for example, one thing that I was surprised to learn was that the huge increase in biodiversity during the last 100 million years massively outweighs the species lost in past mass extinctions, for example. That's one thing that you wouldn't perhaps take away after watching one of these doom and gloom documentaries.
Yeah, I think that the documentaries serve a purpose in the sense of getting people excited about the environment, of getting them to appreciate the natural world that we live in, and the importance of defending that. But I think you're right, is that there's a big problem when it comes to the narrative surrounding these issues. And to kind of go back to your previous discussion just now with Michael, is that often these environmental narratives aren't actually about climate change. You have the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion saying that, oh, actually the movement isn't about the climate. It's about overthrowing capitalism. It's about overthrowing the patriarchy and Western imperialism. You've got the Green New Deal. If you read it, it's actually about universal healthcare and a federal jobs guarantee, and all this kind of wish list of economic and social issues that are thrown in with the environment. And to me, one of the reasons why people reject a solution like nuclear is because it's almost seen as too easy. It's seen as too effective to solve this problem, because it doesn't allow them to bring on board all these other economic and social issues that are actually higher up on their agenda. So I think we need to really reframe this conversation in terms of what is important environment and what they want to do in terms of changing the economy or changing social issues and all these other things. And that's really the crux of the issue, is that the narrative has been taken away from a discussion on climate and the environment and towards all these other kind of political wish lists.
Because, Mike, I wonder, a lot of the policy responses, especially put forward by the left, but wholly endorsed actually by the right, especially in our country, there are a lot of unintended consequences of much of this alarmism and a rush to do something. And one example that I picked up from the book, which stood out to me, was that in California, banning plastic bags, which we indeed have done, or at least we had done before the pandemic, and realised actually we quite needed them. It resulted in more paper bags and other thicker bags being used to supplement them, which in turn increases carbon emissions. So you have all of these unintended consequences.
That I'm very happy with the British government right now.
On
in
nuclear,
some ways, I think it has. Yeah, I think so. You have definitely. I see conservatives in Britain kind of repeating similarly catastrophist nonsense that the left says about climate change. Though I do think they're more moderate. But I think the conservatives have done pretty well in Britain to strike a balance between recognizing that it's a serious issue, but also that you don't want to destroy your economy to deal with it. And I don't want to, and I'm not making any judgment at all or saying anything whatsoever about the prime minister, because it's just not even something I should weigh in on, but more that it does appear the British government is going to build 2 additional reactors at Sizewell, which is great, exciting news. It's the best news in nuclear that we've seen for months, maybe years, because what it means is that Britain is taking a leadership role on this really vital technology. So I will address your question on plastic bags, but I will say the nuclear question is much more important than the plastics question, at least at a civilization, at a basic level of civilization. Nuclear energy is extremely important. But yeah, on the point about the unintended consequences, you're exactly right. I think we all thought that these alternatives would be better, but it turns out that bioplastics are worse for the environment, both the ones made out of grains like corn or other bioplastics. Palm oil or other kinds of biofuels are bad for the same reason that bioplastics are terrible. It requires deforestation and growing more crops when you want to use less crops. And so what we get with petroleum-based plastics is you basically using a waste byproduct that you have no matter what because of the petrochemical industry, and you make plastics out of it. And then we have good solutions to it. It can either go in landfills in the United States or it can be incinerated in the European Union. Obviously, they do a little bit of both in both places. And both of those are terrific solutions. Our landfills are extremely well managed. The trash is incredibly compacted. We capture the toxic methane or natural gases that come out of those landfills, and we use that as energy. And the incinerators no longer produce dioxin, which was the chemical that we worried about when people worried about incinerators 30 years ago. Things have changed a lot. So, the overall message is just that these innovations, it's a good news story. I mean, it's just hard to not be inspired by it, that the more that humans prosper, the less material throughput, and the less of the environment we use. This is the greatest. We will look back at newspapers. Your generation, because you guys are much younger than I am, you would look at newspapers as a barbarity. Why did I still feel guilty for all the books I use, but the idea like this is a dematerialization engine. You don't need we used to have records and record players and CDs and alarm clocks and separate cameras, and now I think increasingly I even can watch good football games in the British province on my cell phone. So who knows if we'll even have TVs. So we've dematerialized our impact, and that's incredibly positive news for the natural environment. And so I really think that the overall story is a really positive one. There's some areas that are neglected that we need to care more about. We are eating too many wild fish. About a third of the fisheries in the sea are overfished. About a third are at capacity, and 1/3 are recovering. But that's a terrible ratio. And the number of Chinese and wealthy Asians and wealthy people around the world that are able to consume wild fish and afford it makes that a very serious problem. And we continue in the book. I describe, continuing to protect some of the most spectacular wildlife in the world, including mountain gorillas, elephants, sea turtles. These are all species that we don't pay enough attention to, but we'll save them by using more plastic, not less. And for the people that live near them in particular, they're going to need to use more fossil fuels so that they can have the food production to take the pressure off of those wild special places that David Attenborough rightly draws attention to as spectacular, but wrongly thinks can be protected by everybody becoming a lot poorer, relying on renewables, and somehow going back to nature. I'm sorry, but his book is not a good book. I looked at it. It's wrong on energy in in ways that anybody who reads Apocalypse Never will recognize as soon as they pick it up. So he's got a wonderful voiceover. I love his voice. Every American loves David Attenborough's voice. It's become something we actually we make fun of a little bit, and we all try to imitate it. And he's an amazing actor in that sense, and he's an amazing had an amazing conservation career, but he doesn't know anything about energy. He doesn't really show much empathy for people in poor countries that are trying to lift themselves out of poverty. He doesn't show much empathy towards the characters in my book, like Bernadette in the Congo or Suparti in Indonesia. He's a rich Brit. He's a rich British conservationist who's kind of in the colonial tradition of where you get to just kind of treat Africa like your giant playground. And it turns out there's actually a lot of people that live there that would actually like to live like David Attenborough. And that's not something that he deals with. And I think it's irresponsible, and I appreciate kind of everybody celebrating him, but it's like, okay, he makes good voiceovers for documentaries, but he's got really pretty terrible ideas when it comes to what to do about how to protect the natural.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do not like the worshipping of him, to be honest. I think he is a dangerous man with dangerous ideas. And definitely, going back, you mentioned Malthus earlier. The Malthusian idea that we need to cull the human population is one that I think if anyone else said that, they'd be viewed as a crazy old communist, right? So, and quite rightly so, in my opinion. But Chris, that said, what do you think genuine concerns on climate change should be? Can it really be the case that the vast majority of scientists, for example, are exaggerating everything for political purposes or as part of some other vested interest?
Yeah, just quickly also to emphasize one point Michael said before I answer that question is really when it comes to environmental problems, the biggest enemy of the environment is poverty. You see anywhere where there is poverty, you tend to have greater environmental problems because people aren't able to dedicate the resources they need to solving environmental issues. They tend to burn the wrong kinds of things because they just don't have access to more efficient technologies and things like that. And you see wherever countries get richer and there's more prosperity, they use fewer resources, they get cleaner energies. And really, I think the message here from our perspective should be that prosperity is what brings about good environmental outcomes, and we should not be committing people to poverty for the sake of the environment when actually poverty is what's bad for the environment. Just so to respond to your question, I think that there is a problem mostly with people taking various scenarios that scientists put forward and then representing that as absolute truth or absolute fact, and then kind of using the media and using kind of popular movements like the Sunrise Movement to really overinflate and exaggerate these claims. At least the scientists I've spoken to, a lot of them get quite frustrated when these claims are exaggerated because they say, no, that's actually not what we're saying. They're not saying, oh, we're going to die in 12 years. They're saying, oh, we have a certain amount of time to start coming up with these solutions to these problems, but it's not like the world's going to die in 12 years and billions are going to die because of it. So obviously you'll have your kind of rogue scientists that tend to publish exaggerated and reckless ideas and pseudoscience, but you do also have a lot of scientists that come up with a range of scenarios, and then people always look at the worst case scenario as if that's de facto what we're going to be going to. And I think there's a real risk there to the integrity of science and also to the honesty of our media and our popular movements and our politicians, is that we should not be using worst case scenarios to predict and to command what we're going to do now, but we should be looking at it realistically and coming up with the most cost-effective solutions. And as you were saying, to bear in mind the unintended consequences of policies, for example, that would impoverish us rather than allow us to have economic growth at the same time as environmental sustainability. So I think there really needs to be a more honest conversation around these issues.
And Mike, if thinking about the Green New Deal, and obviously in that context, President-elect Biden is or was a proponent of, what was it, $2 trillion of extra spending on the Green New Deal. Now, he's not going to be able to do that because the Republican Party, there wasn't this blue wave that has swept the Republican Party out of both houses. But you supported the precursor to the Green New Deal, the new Apollo project. I wonder, what are the solutions that Biden, who doesn't have as much legislative freedom as perhaps the Democrats anticipated that he would have, what are the solutions? If you were to be invited onto the transition team, what would you be saying to President-elect Biden?
Yeah, well, I just wrote a column for Forbes about this today. I think that it's obvious that if Biden really wants to do what he said he wants to do, which is to unite Americans, that he said Americans vote for him just as much as he wants to represent Americans who did. If he wants to reach out and really bridge the divide, he's got to do something big. It's got to be bold. It's got to be audacious. It's got to help him to both deliver on his own goals, but also help Republicans feel like they're part of it. And literally at the top of that list would be nuclear power. I mean, nuclear is loved by Republicans. Conservatives in Britain love it too. They on both sides of the Atlantic, conservatives understand that nuclear power means national strength. They like it for national security reasons. They understand more than progressives do that nuclear energy is here to stay. There's no getting rid of it, that America needs to have nuclear, I don't want to say dominance, but it needs to have nuclear superiority. I don't want to say supremacy. That word is tied up with bad ideas, but nuclear, we need to be the leaders of this technology that we invented. And we invented it with the Brits, by the way. Every step of the way. The United States tried to keep it out of British hands after World War II briefly, but the British obviously helped, and we had a whole European team. And this is a very special, dangerous, important technology, and it's very hard for people to understand it psychologically, even spiritually, which is that it's the most dangerous form of weaponry, and it's the safest way to make electricity, and it's the only thing that replaces fossil fuels, because we can't go back to renewables and remain a high energy industrial society. So nuclear energy is special for like a bazillion reasons. You could boil it down to national security, environmental protection, but also jobs. I mean, to expand solar in the United States, here's what that means. It means that some bank makes huge amounts of profits for no reason to finance somebody to literally unbox. That's what all you're doing, unboxing solar panels made in factories in China, sending American wealth to China, and spreading them like, frankly, future electronic garbage over landscapes. I mean, I tweeted a couple weeks ago a video of a Chinese solar farm spread over these green hillsides, and people were horrified. It has like 3 million views on Twitter. And I think it's because no one's ever seen that before. They've only seen propaganda about solar panels. Nobody knows how terrible they are for the environment and how terrible they are for American workers. I mean, the alternative is that we have a forge. We make our own reactor vessels. We make them out of the world's greatest steel. That's what an industrial power does. That's what a great country does. This idea that we should be somehow, or that like buying solar panels is somehow a way to actually power your economy is ridiculous. So look, Biden has a huge opportunity here, I think. That case is increasingly being made by Republicans. It's increasingly being made by Democrats. I think that what Britain did is going to give a big boost to efforts here, because the truth is that there's a huge amount of resistance to renewables everywhere. Nobody likes them. Nobody likes having these solar panels built near them. Nobody likes the wind turbines, which kill birds near them. Nuclear power plants, you can expand nuclear power without any new sites. You can just build on existing plant sites. That's what they're doing in Britain at Sizewell. That's what they're doing at Hinkley. That's what they could do at Moorside and Wilfa, and that's what they can do in the United States. So for me, Joe Biden getting behind a green nuclear deal would be just the thing to add some real heft and substance to that really, I think, quite inspiring rhetoric for a lot of us, not just Democrats.
I wonder if
it is time to move on.
The resentment towards renewable energy, it probably is highlighted in articles like this one here. I hope you can see that on my screen. But that we had this is from the Times in London, a blackout alert for our national grid. And this is down to apparently unusually low wind output coinciding with a number of generator outages. And when you read pieces like this, write-ups like this, you do start to question why it is that we're subsidizing wind and solar to the tune of, I don't even know off the top of my head.
Darren, I mean, you have to understand, I mean, when we first started talking about the electricity reliability problems in Germany, the attacks on us were vicious, personal attacks. It was weird how nasty people got about it. Then the electricity grid starts failing in California for the same reasons. Now it's failing in Britain for the same reasons, and it's also having failed in Australia for the same reasons. You add, surprise, surprise, add a lot of unreliable weather-dependent electricity to the grid, and grids don't handle it very well. You have to just expand and build out the grid, adding all of this completely unnecessary transmission line, which, by the way, is the #1 cause of death for whooping cranes and other important migratory bird species. It's bonkers. There's nothing environmental about renewables. It's actually a spiritual mission to try to harmonize human society with nature. It takes 300 to 400 times more land to generate the same amount of electricity from solar or wind farms as it does from a natural gas or nuclear plant. How could using more of the environment be good for the environment? I mean, it's really, when you think about manias, like tulip mania, in the Netherlands, or when you think about kind of mass moral panics of the past, it's hard to imagine ones that have been more destructive to the natural environment than the ones against nuclear and the one in support of renewables.
Yeah. Chris, how do we, if we think about our generation, who believe that actually the only way that you can solve climate change is actually to adopt socialism, or we face extinction as a species, or indeed as a planet, how do you actually make the case to them that actually there are market-based solutions like nuclear that actually could be the solution to the problems that we are facing as humanity? How do you make that case to them?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, for the kind of extreme part of the spectrum that actually believes that socialism is the answer to climate change, I think all you have to do is point out the track record on the environment of socialist, centrally planned economies. If you look at the Soviet Union, they destroyed entire ecosystems in the name of kind of bureaucratic industrialization. They used 2-3 times more resources per unit of economic output than market-based economies. So if you look at Venezuela now, the way that they're completely destroying the environment there is the track record of socialism on the environment is simply abysmal. There is no incentive for environmental protection. It is all controlled by the government centrally, and there's just no way to hold them accountable for that. There's no empowerment of local communities, of private philanthropists, of conservation groups to come up with these solutions themselves, because the government has all the control. So I think if you point out the track record of socialist economies on the environment, it's simply abysmal. If you kind of go a step less drastic and you go, for example, to the European Union, and is obviously not socialism, but there's still a high degree of central planning, is that the European Union is actually also terrible on the environment. They pay farmers to get rid of hedgerows in the common agricultural policy, which is terrible for ecosystems, terrible for trees, terrible for the animals that inhabit these trees and these hedgerows. We were talking about fishing earlier, and Michael brought up the fact that there is overfishing. The European Union, with the fisheries policy, was directly incentivizing fishers from Portugal and Spain to overfish British waters. And you see that when there's a central plan, there is no taking into account of costs and benefits. There's no understanding of unintended consequences, and you tend to have very bad environmental outcomes. Another example in the common agricultural policy is that there's if you look at maps of nitrate pollution in Europe, and you look at the same map of the highest subsidies for agriculture in Europe, they overlap perfectly. And it just goes to show that there is no accountability when it comes to kind of the central planning of governments, be it socialism or be it a less drastic form of central planning in the form of the European Union. And so when I talk to my peers about these issues and to show them that market-based solutions and solutions based on science and innovation, like with nuclear, are more effective, is if you look at the track record of market-based economies, our pollution is going down faster than ever before. Sorry. You see, we are using fewer resources than we ever have before. We've actually reached peak stuff on 71 out of 74 resources. We use less of it for greater economic output. And why? Because capitalism, because markets, they reward creativity, they reward efficiency, and they actually have an incentive to create more with less. And so at the end of the day, economic growth is actually not about exploiting nature or just haphazardly destroying the world for profit. It's about being able to create more and to do better things and have better innovations with fewer resources. And you just don't have that with centrally planned economies. So that's really kind of the line that we have to hammer home for, especially my generation that thinks that eco-socialism is the answer, because no, actually, the track record of socialism on the environment is simply abysmal.
Beautifully put. Mike, I wonder if you could just explain for us, because both of you argue that intermittent wind and solar are insufficient to deliver reliable, low-carbon electricity. Given that the UK has put in law achieving net zero by 2050, you've said, actually, I think you said this in the Telegraph off the top of my head, that the UK could find itself by 2030 in the foremost ranks of nuclear building countries. You seem to suggest that it's on the right track and be the undisputed leader of nuclear in the West. You know, that eradicates our reliance on the Russian bear, for example, and in so many other ways, it's just a net positive. Could you just set out why it is the case, actually, that intermittent wind and solar are so inefficient?
Sure. There's several things. The first thing is just that renewables, as I mentioned, just require than natural gas or nuclear. So that is a huge cost, economic cost, in addition to huge environmental costs. The second problem is the unreliability, the weather dependence. It means that you can, never really rely on them. I mean, bottom line, you cannot rely on solar and wind as a civilization, as a society that has hospitals and buildings and people that need electricity 24/7 without any question. And so, and that relates to this slightly more technical aspect of it, which is just that to maintain that reliability with intermittent or unreliable sources, you have to basically just build a much bigger, more materially intensive grid with more wires, more transmission, more distribution, more backup power generators. You just have to have natural gas plants ready to fire up. On wind. That's just what the British grid experiment shows. That's what California shows, Germany, Australia. It's just the same everywhere. So all of those things just load up the cost. I think the point on nuclear that's important to understand is that countries are building nuclear power. If the West, lets Russia and China dominate that market, that's dangerous from a national security perspective. And the reason that's dangerous is because the line between hard power and soft power runs directly through nuclear power. One side is a pathway to building a weapon, and on the other side is a pathway to clean and abundant electricity. And the United States and Britain the West has made being involved in nuclear power plant construction a high priority since 1950s, and we're at risk of losing that. And if we pull away from that, then basically we're just consigning the world to basically be in partnership with authoritarian and in some cases totalitarian societies. I think it's frightening that during COVID, Vladimir Putin became basically president for life, and China appears to be accelerating its genocide against its ethnic Muslim minority. So these are two countries that I don't think, as a member of the human race, I'm just not comfortable sort of ceding the planet and ceding the most important and powerful technology in the world to.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, you've independently argued that actually, if we replace the reactors that are if we don't rather replace the reactors that are set to close. We have, as Mike said earlier, announced that we will do some, but we haven't gone far enough. I think you would argue, correct me if I'm wrong, you argue actually it's dangerous to be so dependent on imported natural gas, and for all the reasons that Mike has just set out. But why is nuclear actually preferable to natural gas?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it is important to point out that with natural gas, it's been great that we've been able to transition from coal to natural gas, for example, in America, and it's one of the reasons why U.S. emissions decline more than the next 7 countries combined in the world. And I think that natural gas is obviously a lot cleaner than coal. It's also proving to be cheaper. So I think that it's been great that we've had this kind of shale gas revolution. And the other aspect you mentioned is that it's helped the United States, for example, become energy independent for the first time. And so that means that we are no longer dependent on Russia, on Saudi Arabia, on these countries that we don't want to be dependent on. So from an energy perspective, it's very important, but also from a geopolitical perspective, it's important that we're not dependent on these countries. I think when it comes to the differences between natural gas and nuclear, obviously nuclear is a completely emissions-free energy source. So when it comes to climate and trying to reduce our CO2 emissions, it's obviously preferable to have emissions-free energy from nuclear than from natural gas. The other issue is that nuclear is basically an infinite energy source, whereas natural gas is obviously finite, and we don't know when we will run out of natural gas, but at some point we will. And nuclear is just the perfect, reliable source that we don't risk running out of. So I just think that obviously natural gas is better than coal, and it's been a great transition energy source, but we should really be emphasizing that nuclear, of any energy source, nuclear is the cleanest, nuclear is the safest, it's the most reliable. It just has all these benefits that other energy sources just simply can't match up to.
Mm. Mike, if we think about, I want you to sort of get on your soapbox for a second, and I'm sure you'll be able to. I've watched you many times do this, but I would like you to set up. I would like you to set out why it is that you believe that groups like, and I know you've actually done a recruitment drive with former spokespeople from Extinction Rebellion, but I wonder if you can set out why it's actually dangerous, one, to put the fear of God into people, that nuclear energy will lead to disasters that we've seen, 3 times, I think, throughout, if we could, 1970 something was the first one. And if you consider that they're putting the fear of God into people around nuclear, telling us that it's unsafe and it's not the solution to our problems, but also putting the fear of God into our children, which I find uniquely unforgivable. So I wonder, get on your soapbox and tell me, go 2 barrels to Extinction Rebellion.
You should not wish for your worst enemies to panic, because panic literally means unthinking behavior and action. And yet that's what we saw with Extinction Rebellion. In my book, I describe how I think they put people's lives in danger, the lives of Extinction Rebellion activists, by that action on the tube in London, where they could have easily been kicked and beaten to death. I mean, that's maybe me projecting Americans onto Brits. The Brits were very good because they actually pulled people back and they protected these guys, but, not safe and not fair to kids. I mean, look, it's probably the case that social media is, and I would blame Instagram as the father of an adolescent girl, for the rise in anxiety and depression among young people. It's actually quite tragic the more you understand it and realize what's happening with social media. We've seen rising anxiety and depression in all populations, rising suicide rates. And I think to then layer on top of that, this idea that kids aren't going to live long enough to have kids, to have their own kids, that's just immoral. I don't know. I just can't, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I just think it's really, really unethical to tell young people that. It's false. In fact, we should be telling kids the truth, which is that they're going to have much better lives than humans did before them, much better. In the same way that my life in so many ways is better than my parents' life, and their life was better than their parents' life. And yes, things go wrong for some people, but the overarching story is of human progress. And this is wonderful because it means that you can make whatever life you want. You can love who you want to love. You can do whatever kind of work that's best for you, that you want to do. You can live in different parts of your country, and sometimes you can even live in different parts of the world. And this is a beautiful, beautiful world and future that kids are inheriting, and that this earth that they get to go see mountain gorillas, which is amazing. They get to see yellow-eyed penguins. They get to swim with sea turtles. So this idea that nature is dying, this idea that we're on the cusp of an apocalypse, false, 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 and unethical for anybody to say that to young people. It's absolutely irresponsible. It should be denounced, as it has not still been, by most climate scientists who want to use that fear to gain social, political, and economic power in the society. I think it's really immoral. You know, I just, that's why I wrote this book. I don't think it's right. My daughter's fine. She's 15. I talked to her about the science, but her friends, they told me things that were disturbing, you know, and they know absolutely nothing. They think that maybe plastic straws cause climate change, just to give you one sense of it. You know, it's just depressing, and it's irresponsible by these teachers. I mean, these teachers, Greta Thunberg, according to her and her mother, had many reasons to be depressed other than just the apocalyptic propaganda. But the propaganda didn't help any. She herself says how she was depressed by these documentaries falsely suggesting that polar bears were going extinct.
Yeah. Chris, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to start by saying that there's no denying that there are environmental problems, and the world does have to come together and tackle these issues, and to find cleaner sources of energy such as nuclear, and find better ways to conserve wildlife and ecosystems, and restore these ecosystems as well. But I think, yeah, like what Michael was saying, it's reckless to actually tell people that it's so hopeless and apocalyptic. Actually, Steven Pinker from Harvard University released a study recently showing that people that are told that the world is ending and that the apocalypse is nigh are less likely to accept that we need to do something about it, and less likely to make changes in their personal lives to be better environmental stewards. And people that are told that we have optimism, and that we should be positive about it, and that there are solutions out there, such as nuclear, that can tackle many of these problems, people that are told that are actually more likely to embrace environmental solutions, and they're more likely to want to do something about this in their own personal lives. So I think we're really entering a moment in the debate where it's not climate denial against climate alarmism anymore. It's about how do we see the human race, and what is our role in it, and it's about optimism versus nihilism. And I think our side should firmly be optimism.
Surely that makes sense ultimately, right? That if someone believes passionately that the world is actually going to die, why you might as well just live a life of complete hedonism, because everything's going to burn. We're all going to starve to death. The end is nigh. Why bother?
Right.
Yeah.
If the world is ending in 12 years, why bother putting a down payment on your house, or investing money, or doing any stuff that a normal human would be doing? If the world is ending in 12 years, then if I believe that, I would not be living the life that I'm living now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I wonder then, to end for the two of you, sum up for me what you'd like to see from the debate moving forward, given everything that we've just said and the issues that we've just worked through. How can we move to a more nuanced debate around the issues that we've raised, and have it not just be full of hot air, essentially? Very angry hot air, I might add.
Well, I mean, I think honestly, the two of you guys inspire me. I mean, you're the younger generation, and Chris's work has been incredibly important very important for the conservative movement to have a positive vision of the environment, and for the conservatives not to just be naysayers and anti-greens. I think that's absolutely vital to be out there articulating a kind of moderate, scientifically accurate view of climate change and other environmental problems, and to be out there advocating innovation and economic growth and nuclear power. Chris has been it's been just really a thrill. It's been over a year now. I think since we first met in person, it's been a thrill to watch Chris's advocacy develop. And Darren, my understanding is that you just got canceled in Britain, so I just want to say congratulations.
I always get cancelled. It happens every 2 minutes.
Which apparently it's been your first time.
It's not my first time. No. I'm 27 years old, but I've been around the cancellation block.
Well, you bring a really positive presence here, so I really appreciate your work. I think that's the most important thing, is that we should not, he who gazes into the abyss, the abyss gazes back into him, and he who fights with monsters should not become a monster. And so I do think, where I went at the end of Apocalypse Never was I was like, okay, this movement really is this, at least the Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg's, they really do hate human civilization at some level. They really do have a kind of deep anger that really, I think, can fairly be described as a kind of hatred or nihilism. We should not meet that with that emotion. We should meet it with what we would call in the past charity, or a sense of love. And I think that, one of the most important thinkers on this question was the late British philosopher Roger Scruton, who addressed this nihilism and the deep anger and resentment, which I think we see on both sides of the Atlantic and of the political divide. And I think that it's up to us to be positive and to be doing this for the right reasons, which is our care for this crazy species of ours, which eats everything and dominates the earth, and creates unbelievable works of art and genius and beauty, and we should have some love for our species and some love for the civilization that allows us to thrive, not just a small minority of us, but a large majority, and create crazy, beautiful things in the most banal settings. We can find transcendence on TikTok. And we should celebrate TikTok just like we should celebrate sea turtles. There's beauty in all of them.
Chris, before you come in there, I was thinking of Roger Scruton, and I've just been reading him actually before I took this call. I think Roger would have probably argued that actually the fact that we've become a more secular society, the lack of that sort of God-shaped hole in society is responsible for a lot of the religion of green, essentially. And you've spoken about that a little bit before, but to what extent would you agree with that?
It's the main event.
Yeah.
It's the main issue. It's the main thing. But it's the hardest problem, and it's also the most exciting one, because when you ask the question of what you call existential questions, of why live rather than not live, why have a human civilization rather than not have one, why have a United States of America? Everybody here hates each other. Why don't we just break up with each other and have two countries? That question demands the most of us. So whether you believe in God or the afterlife or don't, there is still a question of what are you going to do with this one precious life. And so I think that where I come to was, I think a lot of what we've seen, this manic anxiety and depression, comes from a fear of death. Ultimately, I mean, if you don't believe in God and you don't have certainty of the afterlife, then you're often very scared of death. And in some ways, that's very positive because it keeps us alive. But when you don't deal with it, if you don't recognize that we have the need for transcendence and that we all have an immortality project that we make through our legacy or through our works, then it ends up twisting you in particular ways. Whereas if you're more, I think, conscious of it, that we all have that need, then I think it takes us to a more peaceable place, a place where I think we would actually find greater moderation. I think that's kind of where Scruton kind of goes. I mean, do you really think fossil fuel executives are evil people? Really? You really think they're trying to destroy the planet? Is that really what's going on? People that disagree with you hate nature. Does that really make sense? And you kind of go, no, because they have kids and grandkids and they actually love to be out in the outdoors and they actually do think a lot about climate change, and they actually might disagree with you about it, or they might think there's some other way to do it, and stop being such a jerk. Stop being such a dogmatic jerk about it, and recognize that we're all humans and we're all going to die, and nobody really knows what happens after that. And so we're all kind of mortals, and have some tenderness and treat it with some mutual respect and human dignity, and I think that's decency. What I got from reading Roger Scruton, with some sense of, it's not exactly traditional values, though I think conservatives have identified these things as traditional values. It gets used, this terrible word we call it civility, which makes it sound like what we're talking about is just being polite in a kind of repressed, cold way, as opposed to something else, which says, we need to figure out how to have empathy for Greta Thunberg, and what she went through, and you need to have empathy for the CEO of Exxon, and if you can't do that, if we can't do that, then we're not fully human.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right, Chris, do you want to come in now? Do you want me to repeat the question, or?
Yeah. No.
Okay, great.
Lots of thoughts in my mind. And I know that you're a relatively recently converted Christian, and I'm a Christian, and one of the biggest driving factors and motivations for me in doing this environmental work is because of this idea of caring for creation. And obviously for me, my faith helps with that. But even if you're not a Christian, but you subscribe value to human life and value to this world that we live in, you sense this duty of care towards the natural surroundings that we inhabit. And that's something that Scruton talks about. And Scruton is one of my biggest heroes. And in his book, in Green Philosophy, he talks about the conservative appreciation of beauty. And when we look at the world, when we look at the natural world, our instinct is in many ways to want to protect that because of how beautiful it is. It evokes a certain emotion of beauty and appreciation that to me is also innate to the conservative viewpoint of the world. And so I think that like you were talking, the name of this interview of the podcast is Reasoned. And I think reason really is kind of the most important idea that we have when it comes to coming up with solutions to these problems and the way we approach it. And to me, as a conservative, the idea of conserving is innate. I mean, it's literally in the word. To conserve is to be a conservative is to want to conserve, be it institutions, be it kind of civilization, but also nature and the world that we inhabit. And so my see most and why I'm involved in this as an environmental conservative is to want to emphasize to all the millions of young conservatives around the world that it's okay to want to care about the environment. It's okay to be worried about environmental issues, to be worried about climate change, and to embrace being an environmentalist as part of your conservative identity. When I was growing up and I always considered myself to lean conservative, I always said, I'm conservative except on the environment. I'm actually left-wing on the environment, until I realized that the two aren't mutually exclusive. And it's people like Scruton and also Michael, to an extent, that helped me realize that you can have all these worldviews that are compatible with wanting to protect the environment as well. So that's really my message that I'm trying to work on to get my generation to see that you can be a conservative. You're not evil if you're conservative. You can be a conservative. You can care about the environment. You can be passionate about the issue. You can debate with reason and civility and facts and evidence and science with the people that disagree with you. And at the end of the day, we all care about this problem, and we should just be discussing the solutions and what is most effective and sensible and pragmatic, rather than just villainizing each other. And so that's really why I think getting young conservatives involved in this debate is more important than ever.
Absolutely. I mean, but if conservatives aren't evil, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cancel my membership as soon as we finish this call. But if you
that's why we got into it. That's the attraction. That's the sale.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if viewers to this recording today do want a reasoned conversation about the environment, then you could do very well in picking up this book. And Chris, where can people find a link to yours? And actually, do you want to wave it in the air?
Yeah, I'll quickly. Yeah. Here, can you see it?
Green Market Revolution.
So that's that was really kind of our manifesto of market environmentalism. It was forwarded by Daniel Hannan, and now it's been read in 93 countries. So it's been very successful. Endorsed by Matt Ridley, Steve Forbes, some big names. So you can check it out at greenmarketrevolution.eco. And maybe you can drop a link to it or something to make it easier for people. But yeah,
Absolutely.
Check it out. It's also a free ebook to download. So.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to the two of you for giving up your time.
Thank you, man. Really great talking with you guys. I was really looking forward to this.